Welcome in. The NCAA tournament is upon us. We got the brackets yesterday, Jesse. I know it's a very fun day for everybody. Is it still a fun day for you?
Yeah, Selection Sunday should be a national holiday, or at least that 30-minute window. It's always fun to see the bracket reveal, who got in, who didn't make it. And I always like the camera panned on the 20 teams that go crazy because they've got 4,000 fans there, and this is their Super Bowl. This is what it's all about.
Do you know who did not go crazy when they panned to them yesterday?
Was Wisconsin?
Yes.
Yes, I saw.
There was no clapping. There was no cheering. I think plenty of that had to do with what had just happened and losing the tournament, the title game, the way that they did. But also, obviously, being a 3 seed and not being in Milwaukee, I think there were a lot of expectations that was the way it was going to go. We're going to get into all of it. We'll talk about the Big Ten tournament. We'll talk about Montana. Talk about what some people think is a snub, and actually not just the site, and not just the fact that it's not Milwaukee, but also the timing on it as well. There's a lot to complain about if you're a Wisconsin fan, though. Certainly, the Badgers had a hand in the fact that they are having to go to Denver. So we'll get into all that. Before we do, as always, Home Field Apparel is the official apparel sponsor of the Swing. They have the best vintage gear anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, actually. They have every college that you could possibly hope to find. Wisconsin, again, they have like over 180 colleges. I think it's like closing in on 200. So check them out, homefieldapparel.com. Use the promo code Bucky24 for 15% off your first purchase. One more thing before we get going here, though, Jesse. It is a difficult day, I think, for some, especially myself. I know that I have a little bit of an obsession with PJ Fleck, but it's a hatred more so than is an obsession. But I bring it up all the time because I think he's fake. I just think he's fake. I don't think anything he does is real. There's another guy that has also been on my radar, and that is Fran McCaffery. But I respect Fran because it's just who he is. Just being a loudmouth, all that stuff, like just going crazy. It's just who he is. I respect that aspect of it, even if I don't like him. So I wanted to spend at least a few seconds thinking about Fran as he gets fired from Iowa after 15 seasons. For those watching on the YouTube, the only thing I have in my background today is Fran McCaffery, the Frantrum meter, and him staring at the official in that Michigan State game, which was legendary, only topped by his performance at the Kohl Center in 2014 when he got 2 technicals in about 3 seconds and got kicked out of the game and totally changed the game for whatever it was. But Jesse, I just needed to say that we'll be thinking about Fran, and we will miss him, even though it felt like he was a little medicated this year in terms of not losing his stuff all the time. But we'll miss the Frantrum for sure.
I'm glad you were able to get that off your chest, Zach. I hope this show has proven to be cathartic for you. I appreciate the background and the fact that everything else is cleared out, but we have kept the Frantrum picture. And what a way to go. Just if you know you're on the out, 13-13 left in the game, why don't you just go ahead and get 2 tees and see your way out to the locker room? So Fran gonna Fran? I always looked at Iowa and just thought, like, these guys should be better than this. But that kind of sums it up.
I just wish he would have gone out on a better one. He barely even removed his hand from his pocket. Like, it just pockets the entire time. But it's poetic that he went out by getting ejected for, I think, just saying a couple F words. At least the second one was for saying a couple F words. I don't know what the first one was for, but I didn't dive into it too hard. But we'll salute to Fran McCaffery. It's been an amazing 15 years, and look forward to your next chapter for sure. All right, let's jump into this. It is March Madness is here. Before we dive into Wisconsin and Montana and playing in Denver and all that good stuff, let's talk a little bit about the Big Ten tournament because, yes, yesterday happened. Yes, they shot 22%. A lot of it looked like short shots, and they had an 11-point lead and couldn't close. That is tough. That stings. But I think the 3 days before that, certainly Wisconsin got back to kind of what they had been before that little stretch toward the end of the year. So they take care of Northwestern. They blow UCLA out of the gym. That 16-point win was not a 16-point win. It was close to a 30-point win if the last few minutes don't happen. It was just ridiculous. And then they played toe-to-toe with Michigan State in a very choppy game because the officiating was horrible. And they find a way to win that one in the end, too, even with John Tonje missing 2 free throws, then him coming up big on the defensive end. I think those 3 days are extremely important for Wisconsin's hopes going forward because they needed to build that confidence a little bit. I don't put a ton of stock in Sunday because we haven't seen that a ton from them where they just can't hit a shot to save their life. But overall, Jesse, impressive 3 days. Impressive. Yeah, we'll go 3 days and kind of okay on the not really great on the fourth in terms of offense, but defense, pretty good there.
Yeah, very much so. It was a good week for Wisconsin, nearly a great week, but to make the Big Ten championship game in back-to-back years, and this is the first time they've made the semis in back-to-back years in a decade since the last time we saw the Badgers go back-to-back Final Fours. So, we came in not knowing necessarily what to expect because of what we saw against Penn State, because the Badgers lost 3 of the last 5 regular season games. I think for the most part, they righted the ship and gave you some confidence about what could be possible. I think the 3-point barrage, John Tonje going 6 for 6, and I'd like to say that is something you'll never see, except we saw it in January when they made 21 threes against Iowa. So they had the 19 threes, and it's tough to figure out what to make of Big Ten tournaments in general, because if you're an NCAA tournament team, and I know we're going to get into that next phase here, but it's like, okay, you did all this, you accomplished all this, and now you've got to play in 4 days. And also, yeah, they didn't score against Michigan, and they were playing 4 games in 4 days, and I don't care what level you're at, and certainly Michigan was playing 3 in 3 days. That is extraordinarily difficult to do when over the course of a normal season, you will play 4 games over the span of maybe a week and a half. You usually get, in the heart of Big Ten season, you get 3 games in a week, something like that. So it's understandable why they didn't play that well. I don't know if I learned anything necessarily about this team because we've seen what the ceiling can be. But if you are a Badgers fan, you just have to hope that the ceiling that materialized during the best performances in those first 3 days is what we're going to see on Thursday and potentially Saturday and beyond.
Yeah, look, we can dive into the game on Sunday a little bit more, but I just think the win on Saturday kind of proved who this team is a little bit. Just the grittiness down the stretch to find a way to close against the Michigan State team that had been as hot as any team in the country leading into that. I mean, maybe save for Florida. Like Michigan State had won a lot of games in a row and had done it mostly in impressive fashion. And they just couldn't get past Wisconsin on Saturday. All the stuff that didn't go right for Wisconsin in that first matchup in East Lansing. Badgers found a few extra shots to go in, and that was the difference. But in the end, the defense, right? Like Carter Gilmore coming from way deep in the paint and coming out and blocking Trey Holloman, and then you get John Tonje at the free throw line, not able to hit either of those free throws, but then him to have the cojones, the stones, whatever you want to call them, to go for the ball in that situation is certainly made up for missing those 2 free throws. And I don't know that I've seen him miss 2 straight free throws this year. Probably has, but I don't necessarily recall it. I asked him afterwards if he could remember the last time he did. It had been a while, but the fact that they got it done on the defensive end, which has been a question mark, right, for much of this season, and whether it could be good enough to compare or to pair with the offense to be able to make a deep run. I think we saw a little bit about it, and Greg Gard said as much afterwards. He said he was asked, where have you improved? Where did you see in this tournament where you improved? And it was, we got our bite back on defense because they were, let's be fair about it, horrible against Penn State. Right? Like defensively, they just were not locked in whatsoever against the Nittany Lions on that final game or that final day of the regular season. And they were certainly better these past 4 days.
Yeah, that 3-game stretch is the best of what Wisconsin can be because of the ability to score, to make threes, and the way they've improved defensively. When we were talking to Greg on the show about a month ago about the way the defense had improved from a team that was maybe in top 50 to trending toward the 30s. And I know he said he'd like to get into the top 25. And they're able to overcome not being necessarily a top 25 defense in terms of efficiency sometimes because of the scoring, but you're going to need that in the NCAA tournament where there's a lot of one possession type games. And it doesn't hurt when you've got John Tonje setting a Big Ten or Wisconsin Big Ten tournament single game record by dropping 32 points. What a great trivia question before then that the two guys tied are Rob Wilson and AJ Storr, who had 30 a year ago. And so I feel like Tonje can be forgiven for missing 2 free throws because he was 12 for 12 before then. Not a great time, obviously, but yeah, what a great defensive play. And in the moment, I thought, oh, that's a foul. Michigan State just tried to sell it really well. He was basically heaving a shot at the buzzer from almost half court, and it was all ball. So great defensive play, but you need the unsung heroes or whatever you want to call them to step up with Carter Gilmore, making a couple threes. I know you were talking to him and he said that he went to a local Y to get some shots up, and that stuff matters. You need your 6th, your 7th guy to play at his best. And so overall, I don't know how you can't come away from that tournament and feel encouraged and impressed by what they did, given the competition they had to play. They beat back-to-back NCAA tournament teams, back-to-back teams that had earned a double bye. So even if the championship game didn't go Wisconsin's way, they played pretty darn well for the most part down there in Indianapolis.
They did. The problem of being in the arena on those type of plays is you don't get a replay on the big board. Like you don't get an all angle replay on the big board. So like when and especially where we were sitting, which was not on the floor anymore. I know no normal person cares about this whatsoever. But one of the greatest things about the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament is being able to sit on the floor, be able to sit courtside behind the TV people and behind the stadium people. Like it's one of the benefits of it. And the Big Ten has just stuck up their nose at the media. Last year up in Minneapolis, they reserved only one side for media. And this year, nobody got to sit courtside. We were all up in the second level, essentially in the end zone. Again, I know nobody cares about it, but like I'm talking about being able to see stuff, be able to hear stuff, it makes it a little bit more difficult. But so I didn't get a replay on that. And I'm like, I mean, they were trying to foul. You could see Greg Gard saying foul, 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 foul. And so I thought he did. I thought he did foul him. And I tweeted that out, which was stupid. And then I finally found a replay, and it was all ball. It was clearly all ball. And so, yeah, it was a really, really good play. And I know Tom Izzo was originally like this, and then he's, they wanted to win that tournament, but I also don't think he's upset that they went that way and lost the way they did, because it gives them a little bit of a kick in the butt that they're not as invincible as maybe they thought that they were to that point. But, yeah, John Tonje making up for a missed free throw with a great defensive play. I didn't have that. What do people say on my bingo card? I didn't have that on my bingo card. But it is what it is. So Wisconsin gets to Sunday, play Michigan, 11-point lead, despite shooting as badly as they did. John Tonje does not score in the first half. He ends up going, I think it was at 1 for 14.
Yes, from 14 from the field. From the field,
0 for 5 from 3, and was 7 of 8 at the free throw line. You get John Blackwell being the leading scorer, but he was 6 for 17. Max Klesmit, 4 for 14. It was just a really, really poor shooting day for him. Actually, the worst shooting day. I don't think you were covering the Badgers yet when that 36-33 game happened.
No, the Penn State Big Ten tournament game that set basketball back 60 years.
Yes, I don't think that was 2011, but you came in the fall of 2011, so you right. Probably didn't get to see that. That was the last time they shot worse than they did yesterday in a game. Any game.
That's amazing.
Not Big Ten tournament game. Any game. 22%, 22.3 or something like that. What was it? 22.1% was the worst since that game. Maybe you already saw the tweet, but can you tell me what the percentage was that Wisconsin shot that day?
I'm going to say 19%.
9.5%.
Unbelievable. I didn't even know that was possible.
9.5%. They had a couple other games where they were under 20% that season. So I don't know how that was necessarily possible, because I want to say that team, which team beat it was that team that beat 2010, 2011 team that beat Ohio State when they were number 1 in the country.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah,
Either way, either way, insane that it comes from this team. I would not have expected it from this team. But when you take 39 threes and you make 7 of them, you're going to have not a great shooting percentage. The 39 easily their most, not easily the most, but their most this year, topping the 37 that they took in a game earlier this season. So
I will say, before we move on to the NCAA tournament, is talking about the Big Ten tournament championship game. After watching the way Michigan played over the course of that entire game, I understand why the Wolverines have the record that they do in close games and 5 points or fewer. And I know we were talking before, and I think you called it maybe the luckiest team. And there is a degree of luck, but like Wisconsin obviously missed some shots, but they defend the hell out of you. Michigan does, and they make it tough. It doesn't hurt to have 4 games in 4 days, though, where like that's why it's hard to know what to take from a Big Ten tournament in general and a loss like that, because there's no other circumstance where you're playing that many minutes over the span of 4 days.
Yeah, I will push back a little bit on the defense for Michigan. I thought Wisconsin had a ton of good looks in the first half, that you would take every day and expect them to make them, and they didn't. Tanjay they got into Tanjay, but like that was this. I mean, so did Michigan State, so did UCLA, so did Northwestern. Every team gets into him these days. He's the best scorer on the team, and it didn't matter because he was making just some ridiculous shots against Michigan State, or excuse me, UCLA, and then Michigan State. So, but I guess I'm not saying they're a bad defensive team at all, right? I think Michigan, especially with those two, with Wolf and Golden, they're very, very difficult to deal with inside. But I thought Wisconsin actually did a pretty darn good job, especially rebounding. Like I thought after what happened against UCLA and Michigan State on the offensive glass, especially early against Michigan State, then it kind of went away. But I thought the offensive glass was going to be a huge problem for the Badgers, and it wasn't. Like I mean, the defensive glass and team in terms of keeping Michigan off the glass, it was not nearly the issue. But when you talk about luck, I look at that last possession for Michigan where those 3 reviews happened.
Yeah.
I mean, the ball going off a guy, the same team 3 times, like the ball going off Carter Gilmore's foot. I mean, at some point you have to just be like, okay, there is some luck to this. I have not said that they're a lucky team. I think the end of the game, and this is not me. I'll give credit to the person that said it. Grant Bill said this. They're luck merchants. Like end of game luck merchants. Because look how many games they won in the end. We saw this in 2021, 22 with Wisconsin. 18-1 in 1-score games. There is a little bit of luck there, and there's always going to be a little bit of a go back to the norm, or the every all water finds its level. Wasn't that Nigel Hayes' thing? Like eventually, you're going to come back down. But Michigan's been able to find ways again and again. They either get blown out or they win close. Like they're not blowing teams out, or they haven't been blowing teams out very often.
Yeah, I also think, and I'm sure you'd agree with this, you also put yourself in a position to be fortuitous at times. I mean, obviously there is some luck involved, but like they're used to being in close games. They're not rattled. I'm surprised, honestly, that even though we've seen Wisconsin blow too many double-digit second-half leads, when it got to 11, I'm like, neither one of these teams can score. Does Michigan really have enough points? But obviously they were able to do so. You're talking about Golden and Wolf in the semis against Maryland. Those two guys combined for 46 points and 24 rebounds. So to be able to hold them the way Wisconsin did to some degree says a lot about the Badgers defensively. And it just happened to be a day where if you're going to take 39 threes, you're going to need to hit a heck of a lot more than 7, or at least a few more. The good news for Wisconsin is they had a ton of offensive rebounds. And that is one benefit when you take that many threes, is there are long rebounds. So Wisconsin was at least able to get some second chance opportunities, but I mean, you said it all, that this is the worst shooting game since that Penn State game 14 years ago. It doesn't happen very often, and I'd like to think that the 4 games in 4 days is the main culprit, but I guess we'll find out this week.
We will. You mentioned the efficiency wise, right? Like the heading into Greg Gard wanted to get to a certain spot, right? Like 25 is what he wanted to get to. They got to 27. So probably a lot based on yesterday.
Well, I wonder what the final points per possession were. I didn't look. It was 0.7, something
so like Wisconsin, I mean, it was, for Wisconsin was, and again, the points per possession, I'm doing this off of Stat Broadcast, which is what they use. And they don't count possessions exactly the same way as maybe our colleague Jim Polzine does. I usually trust his numbers more than I trust Stat Broadcast. But yeah, Wisconsin was a 0.791 per possession, and Michigan was 0.90 per possession. And if you're wondering, like, what is the goal for points per possession, it's 1. It's always like, that's always the way the Badgers have looked at it, and they've scored over 1 a healthy portion of this season. Not yesterday though.
At least they live to play another day.
They do. They get some more opportunities, or at least one more opportunity coming up on Thursday. So I think I'm trying to think who put this out there. It was a tweet. It's irrelevant. But there's 8 teams that are considered national champion, possible national champions, right? Like potential national champions based on these KenPom numbers. 96% of national champions since 2001 have had a top 21 KenPom offense pre-tournament. 91% of national champions since 2001 have had a top 31 KenPom defense pre-tournament. Wisconsin is one of 8 teams that fits that criteria. Badgers 27th in defense and 13th in offense. Does that give you any belief that it's actually, because I think ESPN did their like ceilings, and I think Wisconsin's was Final Four. Are you feeling that?
I don't know. It's a tough draw. No, I don't know that I am, but I would also say Wisconsin is like so many teams, not only this tournament, but that have come before, that as cliche as it sounds, if Wisconsin plays to its ceiling, absolutely. The problem is, and it's mostly down the stretch here, there have been too many games where they haven't. So you have to make sure you find your form when it matters most, and not have a stretch where you're just absolutely atrocious for 10 minutes and you take yourself out of a game. We could get into the NCAA tournament draw in general. I know the big talking point, and it's understandable, is them not playing in Milwaukee. Honestly, I cannot believe that they're not in Milwaukee. And I understand why, based on the teams who were ahead of them. What it ended up coming down to is Kentucky got the 3 seed slot in its pod in Milwaukee, because Kentucky couldn't go to Lexington, just like Marquette can't play at Fiserv Forum. The next closest was Cleveland, and Michigan State got a Cleveland spot. Alabama got a Cleveland spot. So that ended up sending Kentucky to Milwaukee. It's just, it makes me wonder, and not the first time we've probably talked about this, but like, what is the point of the Big Ten tournament? Why do we do this at all? Michigan won the thing and is a 5 seed. Wisconsin did, I would have thought, enough. I thought all they would have had to do was beat UCLA, but then they went and they beat Michigan State, and they've got to play on Thursday. I suppose this is the complaining part of the show, because I'm obviously I don't have to play a game on Thursday or Friday, whatever. I just think it's absurd that you have to play a Big Ten tournament on Sunday. They should move it up, by the way. You have to play Sunday afternoon, 10 minutes before the draw comes out. So it obviously doesn't matter at all, because maybe they have a contingency, but they basically have everything done, because CBS has to announce it in 42 seconds after the game ends. And not only have you had to play the last game of the conference tournament season, but you have to freaking play at 12:30 Central Time in Denver on a Thursday. You just played 4 games in 4 days, and your reward is to have as little turnaround time as humanly possible for the NCAA tournament. And obviously we know that the Milwaukee was a Friday, Sunday. So this is my Wisconsin got hosed, but They're in the tournament, and now they have a chance to say it doesn't matter. I just can't believe that this is how the Badgers ended up.
So leading into yesterday, I totally agree with everything you said. The Big Ten tournament, I understand why it's played the way it is because they get the lead into the selection show, and so all the eyes, CBS wants all those eyes, and the Big Ten draws it in, and the Big Ten wants that exposure. I get it, but it's not helping their teams. It's hurting their teams, quite honestly. But I actually looked it up yesterday to see what it meant for Wisconsin having to play in a Sunday. Most of the times it's usually 3 games when they're playing in a Sunday, but it's been 4 games the last 2 years, and like what it's meant for them in the tournament. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But the team that is right ahead of them is Kentucky, right? I think a lot of people going into yesterday had Iowa State getting knocked down a little bit because of the way that they went out to BYU in the quarterfinals of the Big 12 tournament. Apparently, it did not matter, and their metrics are impressive. I don't think we can, but they have some bad losses, just like Wisconsin does. Like, so if you want to, I mean, they lost to Kansas State, they lost to Oklahoma State. So, like, if you want to sit there and say Wisconsin lost to Penn State, yes, they did. But Iowa State had some bad losses too. But again, their metrics aren't horrible. The one with Kentucky that's the comparable one, right? Like that's the one you go down the line. You're like, okay, Wisconsin and KenPom 13, Kentucky 16. T rank, Wisconsin's 12, Kentucky 17th. Net ranking, Wisconsin going into yesterday was 14, and Kentucky was 15, and now it's Wisconsin is 15 and Kentucky is 14. The WAB wins above bubble. Wisconsin 11, Kentucky 9, quad 1 wins, which I think is probably where it ends up being the difference for at least in this aspect of it. Wisconsin was 8-8 in quad 1 games, and Kentucky was 11-10. And Kentucky played in the SEC, a conference that put 14 teams into the conference, into the tournament overall. Whether all those teams are actually that good, I guess we'll find out. Wisconsin, I mean, the Big Ten put in 8, right? So like they obviously felt the committee obviously much more impressed with the SEC than the Big Ten, and the SEC had a hell of a year. There's no doubt. Yeah. Wisconsin in quad 2 games, 10-1, Kentucky 1-1. So like they played more quad 1 games and won more quad 1 games, but it's not like they had a significant like percentage wise record better than Wisconsin in those games. It was very tight. And did Wisconsin deserve to be in Milwaukee? Probably, but they also had a role in not being there, losing to Penn State, and choking away a 17-point lead to Oregon is the reason that me and you are not going to be going and getting drinks on Thursday night in Milwaukee or Friday night or Saturday. That's the reason why, because of what happened before, which sucks. That sucks.
Well, yeah, you can't spell media without M and an E and an I, but obviously
I much prefer that hour drive than figuring out Denver.
Yeah. It comes down to the fact, and they said it, a committee, that the SEC is the best conference in the country. And so Kentucky was rewarded. You look, and it feels negligible between the two teams. Kentucky went 10-8 in conference play during the regular season. Wisconsin went 13-7. But Kentucky has a handful of more quad 1 wins because it had the opportunity to play more quad 1 games, and it was just razor thin. And so for Wisconsin's purposes, like internally, they can complain about it, and now they've got to get past it because it's a Monday and worry about the game that they have to play on Thursday. I'm just very surprised by how that ended up. The Iowa State one is also interesting, because I pulled this up. I think we were asked a question about it for when you take questions after the games, and the difference.
Look at you preparing.
Well, you got to do it once a year, so this is the time. Also feels negligible to me. Iowa State's 24-9, Wisconsin's 26-9. Iowa State went 10-7 in quad 1, so maybe that's what they look at. But Wisconsin was 8-8. Iowa State went 6-2 in quad 2. Wisconsin went 10-1, and then both teams went 8-0 in quad 3 and quad 4. So it's like this kind of speaks to what college basketball is right now. I think there's a ton of parity. There isn't that truly great team or a handful of truly great teams, though the 1 seeds obviously are very good this year. It just feels so razor thin between who the 9th best team is and where Wisconsin is. But ultimately, the Badgers can only blame themselves for not finishing off some of those other games. The good news is they do have a 3 seed. It's just not in Milwaukee.
So the Iowa State thing is also interesting because it didn't come out until after the bracket was revealed. But Keyshawn Gilbert, who is one of their best players, is hurt and not playing.
Yeah.
And I know the committee is getting a lot of shit over the West Virginia snub because of injuries, right? Like, so they are not in, and the committee's taking note of the injuries. Is Iowa State in Milwaukee without Gilbert? If they knew that he was not going to play, and again, it's the shadiness around injuries in college still exists even with these availability reports. And I know the SEC, not the SEC, the Big 12 probably does not have what the Big 10 does in terms of having to talk about injuries with guys. But like, honestly, like 5 minutes after the bracket comes out, you turn around and, the Iowa State's talking about Gilbert not playing. So I don't know how the committee does it. I would just prefer that they be consistent about it. If you're going to take injuries into account with this, injuries into account should be taken into account all the time. I don't think they should be taken into account at all because it's not fair to the team, right? It's not fair to the team that has those wins. And yes, maybe they're without a very good player, but it's a team, right? You can't punish them because they're missing one guy. So I'd rather they just not do it at all. But if they're going to, at least be consistent with it. And again, maybe they obviously didn't know about Gilbert, but
I look at it the same way you do, that you're punishing a team despite what its record is because of what you think they might do in the future. And it's like, that's not really, I don't think, how NCAA tournament seeding should be done. I always go back to this because I remember it growing up when Kenyon Martin played for Cincinnati. He had a bad injury in a conference tournament game. And I want to say that it cost the Bearcats a number on the seed. Like they went from 1 to 2, and it was specifically because they lost such a great player. So it obviously has happened, but yeah, I mean, again, all these teams are so close together, and it stinks for Wisconsin because Milwaukee would have been awesome for the Badgers. But you do go back to, look, you have 9 losses. And so you're going to lose some games when you play 35, but like a couple of those, you just can't lose if you want to put yourself in the best position possible.
Look, the 26 wins are the most they've had going into an NCAA tournament since 2015. So they had a really, really good regular season. And Greg Gard said as much yesterday. I asked him about whether they were tired, whether they had, tired legs was a problem. It was the issue yesterday against Michigan with the shooting and all that. And he said, no, he said, look at our rebounding. Our kids have given us everything all year long. If Michigan had killed them on the offensive glass, maybe that's a tired thing, but he thought that they crashed the hell out of the glass. And I would agree. But he finished that by saying they've had a hell of a year. 26-9. They're picked to finish 12th in the Big Ten, and they went and showed that that's not who they are, and that they believe, and he believes, they still have a lot of basketball left to be played, and then they can do some damage in the next couple of weeks. Someone did reply to that with, damage to my heart in the next 2 weeks, which is, I think, fair, because that's what usually happens in the NCAA tournament is you get crushed. But that's also the beauty of it as well, that your team is in it and you're so invested in it that it means that much that, but it was a really good season for considering where they came from, right?
I think it's a great season considering
where
they came from.
And yet,
of course, you always want more. And when you see when you see what the ceiling can be, you think that they should be better. But overall,
I guess for me, I'm more saying, and yet, what happens this week is what we'll remember. Which to me, I mean, that's always tough, but it's probably, that's the way it is. We put so much focus on the NCAA tournament, we put so much focus on March. It's what we talk about. Start talking about March in November, right? Like there's an off-season bracketology. Like we are focused on the NCAA tournament. That is what ends up mattering. I believe Stephen Crowell told Polzine yesterday, now comes the tournament that actually matters. that went in any ever, in what that it matters in the end of it, right? So this is now is the term that matters, and this is where legacies are determined for both programs and coaches.
Yeah, absolutely. And should we break down the bracket now, or what
Let's
was?
do it. Yeah, let's jump into this. Wisconsin will play Thursday. The final game on Sunday. I believe the third game on Thursday morning, out in Denver, in altitude. I'm sure that's going to be a story because we like to make stories about stuff like that. But yeah, play a Montana team that has won 14 of their last 15. They won the Big Sky Championship. The only loss they had in that 15 game stretch was an overtime loss to Portland State. They have a really good player, Money Williams. I love the name Money. Yes. I don't know if that's his actual name, but it's a fantastic name for a basketball player. And they play a ton of guards. They do not have much size. James Madison didn't have much size last year, but it's a different team than James Madison. This team is definitely more, I would say, offensively gifted than they are defensively. And they're going to put some pressure on Wisconsin for sure.
That part has to be the concern, is ball pressure and what Wisconsin does with it. Will the Badgers be able to not turn the ball over and get quality looks? To me, this is a matchup I think Wisconsin wins, and maybe even wins handily. Sometimes you have that feeling. You had that feeling when you saw James Madison and they'd won 30 plus games. And this is a team in Montana that, like, they didn't play very many teams that were like Wisconsin in terms of quality. I think they were 0-4 against quad 1 teams, and they were 1-2 against quad 2 teams, but they went 17-0 against quad 4 teams. They basically got all their wins against teams that are at the lower levels of college basketball. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't come in here and win, because they've been playing very well. I just look at it and think Wisconsin has the size. They should be able to take advantage of it. When you've got that combo of Crowell and Winter, and I know they're not always on the floor together, but they certainly start the game. But they're going to have to be extremely assertive, and Tanji's going to have to play like All-American Tanji, not certainly the one for 14 against Michigan. But in terms of first games, while the location stinks and the time stinks, the actual matchup, I think Wisconsin should be okay in this one. My bigger concern is just going from the Sunday 2:30 game to what in Denver will be a morning game. Like, it's a 12:30 Central game, but it's 11:30 there, Denver?
Mountain time. Yep.
I just don't think we can underrate the impact of having to turn around from 4 incredibly difficult, grueling days to, in less than 4 days, having to start your tournament. So that would be my biggest concern.
That's a huge concern. I think getting by Montana, they'll get that done. I think the bigger concern would be 2 days having to play, on Saturday against BYU or VCU.
Yes.
BYU was playing a really, really good basketball before losing by 20 to Houston, a team that I think a lot of people, maybe not a lot, I may be one of those that picks them to win it all. They are very good on both ends of the floor, and maybe outside of Florida, I think Florida's obviously the team that a lot of people will pick just because they have been on a tear of late. But I really like Houston and Duke if Cooper Flagg is healthy and playing. But if Wisconsin somehow gets by Montana and then beats BYU or VCU, they'll get to Newark and potentially take on Alabama. And then it's, I believe, Duke. Obviously, Duke would be the 1 seed there. It's a very, very tough. Outside of Montana, it's a really, really tough region to try and find your way through. I think it's again, I want to believe that the 3 days before yesterday is who Wisconsin is going to show up this week and be. But there's a little bit of trepidation on my part that maybe Sunday's going to carry over a little bit. I don't know. Again, I think Wisconsin wins Thursday. I think Saturday's maybe a coin flip for me, especially if it's BYU.
That's how I feel about this matchup and this weekend too for Wisconsin. And inevitably there's like one extremely difficult game where you're against the ropes, at least one, that you have to be able to overcome. And if it should be in that first weekend, maybe you get by it and Wisconsin can breathe a sigh of relief, not be nervous, and then just go ahead and play to its potential. But it is an extremely tough draw. And the VCU BYU game, so BYU had won 9 straight games before obviously getting housed by Houston in the Big 12 tournament. But in that stretch, they beat Iowa State, which is a 3 seed, twice. They beat Arizona. They beat probably the worst Kansas team I can remember, but it's still Kansas, so they're in the NCAA tournament by 34 points in Provo. Like, it is a very good BYU team. And they also shoot 37% from 3, so they can do a lot of they can do a lot of damage. So
that's the one that stood out for sure.
Right. And then with VCU, they're 12-1 since the start of February, so they're obviously playing their best ball. They get over 8 steals a game. Like, it's not necessarily the Shaka Smart VCU, but like they still thrive on some of that chaos. And that always gives me some trepidation when it comes to Wisconsin, because we've seen some issues there. So both very good teams. If Wisconsin should make it out of Denver and that first weekend, they will have accomplished something, because that's going to be a very tough second round game if Wisconsin can get out of the first round. And obviously we know Wisconsin has not made a Sweet 16 in 8 years. So there's also that in terms of what's at stake for this program and for Greg Gard, for all the success Wisconsin has had in the regular season. And it is a lot. You got to be able to pull it off in crunch time in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, it's again not going to be easy. Starting with Montana, and who knows exactly how big of an impact the playing in Denver is going to be. John Tanji has played his ball at Fort Collins. I don't think it's 5,280 feet above sea level in Fort Collins like it is in Denver, but he was asked about it yesterday. It's like, yeah, you're just going to kind of feel heavy a little bit, and there's really nothing you can do about it. And Montana, I believe, is about 2,000 feet lower than that. Did a little, I shouldn't say I did. I forced somebody else to do a little bit of research on it. And, but I don't know about BYU. In Provo, I don't know exactly.
I'm just going to look it up.
All right, let's do that.
Provo elevation, 4,551 feet.
Yeah, so not much of a problem. Not much of a problem. But Wisconsin went out to Provo and like for football and beat up on them.
Yep, it is possible. Well, it's not the most ideal conditions and circumstances for Wisconsin, but at least the Badgers are in.
They are, which is more than you can say for quite a few other Big Ten teams that thought they had chances to get in. Meanwhile, North Carolina got in. Congratulations to them. 1-12, I believe, in quad one games.
Unbelievable.
But hey, I mean, they almost beat Duke. That counts, right?
Apparently, to the committee.
Can you
who
imagine
you play and lose to?
Can you imagine that?
No.
A lane violation knocking you out like that? Like sitting in a bar down in Indy, of course, always sitting in a bar for that one. And I was like, what? No. And nobody else is watching the game around me. And just absolutely freaked them out. But what a horrible way to lose a game. We can talk about, and maybe they still would have lost, right? Because it was just tying the game. But is that a worse way to lose than like a 3-pointer at the buzzer from the other team? Like, I feel it is, because it's a mental mistake more than a physical one, right? It's just horrible stuff. For Wisconsin this week, it's success. Like, what is success? Over under 1.5 wins. It's a success if it's over and a failure if it's not? I know we don't like.
Well, here's the thing. I think that's too black and white of a definition, because
I
just don't think if Wisconsin goes 27-10 and loses the second round game, obviously, that you call the season a failure. Maybe you call the NCAA tournament a failure. That just feels too
unfair,
strong for me. But I think everybody would feel like, yes, this was a successful year, and everyone would feel that if they reached the Sweet 16. And that's why the NCAA tournament is just carries such magnitude, because in the end game between round of 32 and Sweet 16, is one game, is one single win, where you're
It's a week,
still
though.
4 games away from even winning a national championship, but you get that extra week, that extra weekend, to make it's the it carries so much weight, and it's understandable. So, yeah, a lot on the line.
I think under would be a failure and over would be a success. You don't do black and white. I can. It's fine.
So if they go 27, the parameters and definitions change based on the timing of the year, right? Like at the start of the season, if anybody would have said 27-10 in second round, you would have said that's unbelievable, right?
Yes.
So,
yes. I mean,
that's where I'm coming from. Like, yeah, I would feel because of what Wisconsin, where they are, the Badgers are a 3 seed, that not making out of the first weekend is a failure. But in the totality of the season, I can't feel that way based on like what they were supposed to be with a bunch of dudes you didn't know anything about because you had 6 new scholarship players. So I see both sides of that, if that makes sense.
So this probably is a good time to bring this up. Last April 25th to be exact, sitting in the McLean Center watching football practice, and I believe that was the time that AJ Storr was entering the portal, or was pulling his name out of the portal, going to Kansas, whatever, and probably right around the time, maybe a little bit later, that it happened with Chucky. You made a proclamation there to me and Evan Flood, and because everything was not looking good at that point, right? Things were not positive. You had no idea who John Tanji was at that point. You had no idea about any of those guys. You had no idea that John Blackwell was going to make a jump or that Nolan Winter was going to make a jump. And yet you said, and I wrote this down because it was very important. It was a very important time. Jesse says Wisconsin will finish 5th in the Big Ten this year. There was an asterisk by it because he wants it noted that he didn't actually know how many teams were in the Big Ten.
I forgot 4 more were coming. Okay, I thought it was going to be an 18-team league. Yeah, there it is.
There it is.
I'm just going to say I had more faith in Wisconsin than the lot of you did, okay? I'm going to take the victory lap and pretend I knew there were 18 teams. But even if I did, I still said Wisconsin would be upper half of the Big Ten. Wisconsin's just going to Wisconsin, man. Very few years are they where they're just an absolutely horrible team. But did I know it was going to be this? No.
I felt like I needed to at least give you credit for it because I think I give you a lot of crap when things don't happen, but needed to as well. Before we jump into some listener questions here, I mentioned the turning results after Wisconsin playing on a Sunday, right? Having to play into Sunday, whether it's 3 games or 4 games, it doesn't really matter. What I found was the good teams play well in the tournament, and the teams that maybe aren't as good or get bad draws don't. So 2004, they won the tournament, got underseeded as the 6th seed, got put into Milwaukee, but were underseeded, lost in the second round to Pitt. 2005, they got to the final and lost, Elite 8. 2007, they got to the final. That was the year that they actually ended up being number 1 in the country for a week. They lost in Chicago to UNLV. 2008, they won it and went to the Sweet 16. 2013, they got all the way to the final and lost. I believe that was the Rob Wilson year where he went off in the tournament, right? That's accurate.
12,
and
12, 13?
Yes.
Was that 11,
and
12?
I don't remember. You can look it up if you want. I mean, you were covering the team.
Yeah, here we go.
So.
All right.
I'm pretty sure. I thought it was 13 against Indiana.
2012 Big Ten tournament.
Okay. All right. Well, I was wrong.
It was 11-12.
Did they go to the final that year?
I don't think so. That team could not shoot.
The team after that couldn't shoot. The 12-13 team could not shoot. But they made it to the final.
Oh, right. 2012 played Syracuse in the Sweet 16.
Yeah. But 2013 made a very similar run as this team did, and then played Sunday and then had to play Thursday, the early game on Thursday in Kansas City.
That's
against
Ole Miss,
against Ole Miss and Marshall Henderson, and shot horribly, and lost that game. That was the only time they've ever gotten knocked out in the first. I should say there's There's 2 times. They've lost by playing into Sunday. They've got knocked out in the first round twice. That was one of them. But 2015, obviously won the thing and then went to the national championship game. 2017, they made it to the Sweet 16. 2024, obviously 4 games in 4 days last year and lost to James Madison. And 2025, we'll see. 4 games in 4 days, and we'll see how that all plays out for them come this week. But 9 times they played on a Sunday, and again, as I think that illustrates it, there's not really a rhyme or reason to whether you have any success in the NCAA tournament, whether you played on Sunday or not. It's really just whether your team's any good.
9 times for you Ferris Bueller fans, but yeah,
9 times. All right, let's jump into some listener questions here. We'll start with Nuclear Badger. Over under number of possessions of zone the Badgers play on Thursday. He sets it at 1.5. They got one. They got one against Michigan State.
Under.
It baffled them. It did. It definitely baffled them for that one singular possession.
Under.
Okay. All right.
You're gonna play zone against a bunch of guards. Just play straight up. Do what you do.
Matt says, what 3-point tournament game was better, Friday against UCLA or Rob Wilson against Indiana?
3-point victory or
no, like the 3-point shooting. What 3-point shooting game in the Big Ten tournament was better, Friday against UCLA or Rob Wilson against Indiana? We just talked about him.
Well, like team-wide performance? I guess I'm
just answer the question. Just answer.
They made 19 threes.
Which one's more impressive?
I'm gonna go this year. 19.
I disagree. Rob Wilson had never scored like double digits, and he dropped 30.
Well, what's the question? Is it a team-wide performance? Like who's 3-point shooting?
What was better?
Making 19 or Rob going off for 30?
Which one was better? And you get to determine what better means. You're saying team because they hit 19 threes, which tied the Big Ten record. Not even the most threes they hit all year. No. Rob Wilson, meanwhile, dropping 30.
Okay, well, if it's
nowhere.
Okay, I thought we were like an apples to apples type situation. Okay, it's Rob. It's Rob Wilson. He set a Big Ten record for Wisconsin with 30 points when he was averaging 4 points a game,
something like that. Yeah. Travis says, does the fact the Badgers might have to play BYU, who doesn't play on Sundays, in a second game contribute to them having to play on Thursday instead of Friday?
Well, I don't know if it has anything to do with Wisconsin, but it has to do with why BYU is there, certainly.
Yeah, and I wonder if that somehow impacted their seed. Maybe they got seeded lower than maybe they should have because they can't play on Sunday, which is, if we're being fair, it's a bunch of bullshit.
All right.
Play a game. I don't care. You think they're the only religious people in this entire world? You think,
no.
Are you kidding me?
They have dropped a seed level. I think they did. Was that last year? They were supposed to be they dropped the line so they wouldn't have to play on a Sunday potentially. 6 feels low for them.
So that's what I'm saying. Did they get put a seed lower because of having to play on Sunday? In which case, it affects Wisconsin as well. I don't think one team being unable to play on Sunday should impact another team. It's not Wisconsin's fault that they won't play on Sunday. So why? I don't know. It was the same thing in 2004 with playing in Milwaukee as a 6 seed. Wisconsin was underseeded that year. Pitt got screwed as a 3 seed having to play in that. And both of those teams are probably good enough to be in the Sweet 16, but because, we're going to put them as a 6, but put them in Milwaukee, give them a little love there, it didn't matter. And I know Bo Ryan has talked about we'd rather be seated properly than play in Milwaukee, and I would agree with that. Do you think it's possible 4 hard-fought games, I'd say 3 hard-fought games, over 4 days play any part of a factor in this coming Thursday's game?
Yes, I do. That I just don't know how you can deny the turnaround. And I don't know, conference tournament play is fun, but especially if you don't get a bye, the extra workload that you have to take. I get the best teams find a way, so it shouldn't matter. But let's be honest, after all that, you got to play 72 hours later, 80, however many hours. I guess it's almost 4 days, but Your travel situations, you got to leave on a Tuesday.
They're leaving tomorrow. Yeah.
So
not ideal. Butterbuilt says, will the Badgers be better off now without Big Ten refs, or will it have the opposite effect and they will get into foul trouble on stuff they're used to getting away with? Just a clarification on this. There's no such thing as a Big Ten ref. Like they ref all over the country.
I don't know who the officials are going to be for this game, but
if it's Keith Kimball, we riot because there's zero reason a guy should be reffing 5 straight games for you, which is what happened. He reffed the Penn State game and he reffed all 4 of the Big Ten tournament games. And he was the Michigan game. I don't know that I have any issue with.
I felt they let him play.
Yes. Yes. Which I guess in the end, I'd rather have than the other way around. But the first 3 games were an absolute joke. Well, the UCLA game and the Michigan State game were an absolute joke. And I saw more of Keith Kimball on the big screen than I did of Nolan Winter at times because of how many reviews that they had to do. And again, that's not necessarily his choice sometimes, right? But it's ridiculous. But either way, do you think it will impact them or anything like that? I guess it's difficult because we don't know who the officials are going to be.
I'm going to say no.
Joe says over under 2.5 games left this season.
This is the money question right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take the under. Yeah. I just the feeling that I have.
Okay.
But you have to answer too. Don't leave me out here on an island.
I feel like the under as well. I don't know. Like, again, I felt good about where they were at heading into Sunday. I'm trying not to let that impact me too much, but I would not be shocked if we're sitting here talking about playing Alabama next week, right? Like I would be shocked if we're sitting here on next Monday talking about that. That wouldn't shock me at all. The BYU game is just going to be, or VCU for that matter, is going to be a huge test for Wisconsin to get over.
It's a coin flip.
Yeah. Yes, I would agree. Scott says, what are you more upset about, not being in Milwaukee or having to play on Thursday instead of Friday? I don't really care when they play. I definitely do care where they play. And I would have. So I'm much more upset about it not being in Milwaukee. I guess that's kind of irrelevant for anybody that cares, but that's more selfish. But anyway, I think anybody that's listening to this would have liked them to be in Milwaukee, except for there were a few people like, oh no, there was the distractions. It's fine. Get away from it. That's a home game. You don't turn down home games in the NCAA tournament. I don't care what happened there 3 years ago.
Was the question directly just about us and how we feel, or was it how we
said you?
We were Wisconsin.
No, he said you. So.
Yeah. It would have been more fun if they were in Milwaukee. I'm going to be there no matter what. So I'll be there for the first 2 rounds. I was trying to figure out who's even there. Kentucky's there. Ole Miss is there. Iowa State is there. But no one I know is going to be there. So it's not going to be as fun.
Selfish. So selfish. Do you think the Big Ten tournament even mattered for Wisconsin seeding?
Only from the sense that if they had lost the first game to Northwestern, I feel like the Badgers would have dropped to a 4 just because of the way things finished and where things were trending in a lot of projections. Though, again, those projections, what the hell do they know? Because I don't know how many people would have had Wisconsin and Denver. That's the only thing I think mattered. But in terms of what the ceiling was, I guess they hit it once they beat Northwestern. I'm just shocked they're not in Milwaukee.
Shocked and appalled. No, not appalled.
Yeah, it's a stretch.
All right. We'll be back on Monday.
Next week.
We'll be back on Monday. I was going to say we could do it Friday, but you're going to be in Milwaukee, so it's all good. We'll talk about. For Wisconsin's sake, and for the sake of the show, and for the sake of my mentions, hopefully they're playing both on Saturday and next week in Newark. But we'll see. Speaking of another show that we do, it's called The Camp. We will have a new episode coming, but I haven't seen any of the practice yet. But can you get to see practice on Tuesday morning? So looking forward to that. And then at some point we'll get together and discuss a little bit about the first 2 practices that you saw and then the one practice I saw, and then they're on break after. Or no, they got one more practice later this week, and then they're on break. So, just a little update on football, I guess. Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Swing.